Hello and thank you for clicking on this video. Welcome back to the Antique Menswear channel. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've changed out the Japanese hand for a nice Edwardian smoking jacket. And what do you think? Maybe we'll make a video about it in the future. It's a bit big for me, to be honest, but I like it. It's warm. Anyway, it's probably well known by now that I am an avid eyewear collector. I have monocles, pince-nez, lorgnettes, quizzes, all this kind of stuff. And today's video is also going to be on eyewear, I promise. We'll get onto clothes in a minute. We'll just get all the eyewear stuff out of the way. Should probably change the channel name to Antique Eyewear Channel or something, but I'm really sorry. I know you're all bored, but if you're interested in pince-nez, this is a great video for you because in my display cabinet here, which is being a bit obscured by my lights, you can see this is where I keep the majority of my collection, at least the really delicate and expensive pieces. And down in the bottom part here, we have pince-nez and some lorgnettes. So if you're interested in when these kinds of things were popular, all the different types of pince-nez and how they work, stay tuned after the intro because we're going to learn lots of things about pince-nez. Okay, so the angle has changed. I'm really sorry that we had to come this close, but I really need a table, and also we're going to be using my face to model some of these pince-nez, so it kind of made sense to me. Anyway, before we get into all the different types and the different dates of different pince-nez, we have to talk about what a pince-nez actually is. And a pince-nez that's a French word which means pinch nose, and sometimes it's anglicised as PinceNeZ is something that people say, and basically all it means is some spectacles that don't hold on with arms or temples as normal spectacles do, but they just pinch the nose like that and they stay on as such. That's basically what pince-nez is. However, there are lots of different types of pince-nez, so we're going to go into all the different types. In lots of literature they are simply referred to as just eyeglasses and not specifically pince-nez. But that's not to say that all pince-nez only grabbed you by the nose, because there is photographic evidence of pince-nez that have temples at the side that wrap around the ear, and also this kind which is called a grab temple, which basically sort of grabs onto the side of the face just here to help them not fall off, I suppose. But most pieces you'll find will just clip onto the nose. So some of you may be thinking, why pince-nez? Weren't temples invented in 1727? Doesn't the pince-nez seem like a little bit of a step backwards? And to some, I can see why they would think that. However, there is a bit of history to this. Now, in the 14th century, of course, we had riveted spectacles, which are kind of like pince-nez. They almost sort of just clip onto the nose, or sometimes they're actually tied to the head, and they were normally worn by monks or learned men for reading literature or for writing. Now, historians normally disagree that there is a direct correlation from riveted spectacles to pince-nez, although they look very similar, and that's because of what happened in between. So you have riveted spectacles which then kind of get tied to the face or tied to the ear. In the 1600s you get what are known as Nuremberg glasses. In 1727 you have temples that are actually invented to help spectacles stay on the face a little bit easier. In Germany in the 1750s you get the scissor spectacles, which were held just below the face for reading, and you know those were more popular in France. In England the quizzer is much more popular, which is why the monocle became popular, and why pince-nez are very popular in France, and why we get the French name pince-nez. So scissor spectacles are being used in France, and then of course in the 1770s you have the lorgnette, and then around the early 1800s, 1840s-ish, I'm not an expert on pince-nez, so I'm only going by literature I've read, catalogues I've seen, and of course the collection that I have. Around the 1840s is when we get the pince-nez, the true pince-nez, and so you can see that actually there's a lot of spectacles happening in between those, which is why there's no direct bloodline. So why do you think that people would have stopped wearing temples, or why do you think some people would have preferred to have pince-nez? Now, like I said in my monocle video, and well, this is the same with the scissor spectacles as well and the lorgnettes, is that there was a huge stigma around disability. People didn't want to be seen to be wearing visual aids or hearing aids, which is why lots of the Victorians hid hearing trumpets inside vases and would kind of pretend they were doing something else while they're actually listening into a conversation. And it's the reason why lorgnettes, quizzes, and pince-nez are all held on ribbons and held up to the face or clipped onto the face so that they can be used briefly and then removed. And at the same time, it's convenience. These are normally, for the most part, in the early 19th century, were just for reading. Not many people had short distance correction. And so if you needed short distance correction, then you'd have to wear glasses all the time. But if you only need to see up close, then you would just put them on and take them off as you needed. So it's more convenient that way. So let's get into talking about the different types of pince-nez. And I'm doing these in chronological order so that you can kind of see the different eras that they were worn. And so if you're buying them for a certain costume or reenactment, that you know exactly what era you're using. I do have a pair of pivoted lorgnettes or pivoted spectacles. They're obviously not 14th century ones. These ones are actually circa 1800 to 1830 is what they say on the tag, which I haven't removed since the auction. And so if I show you these, they actually fold together like this, and then you pull this tab and they fold out, and you can see there's no spring in here, so you just hold them up to the eyes like this, and then you can read your literature and fold them away. Now these are made of genuine tortoiseshell, which makes them very rare and also would have been a very expensive item at the time. And you can see there's also a period repair to actually make the lens a little bit bigger. So what came after this was a sprung type, which had a spring in here, so when you opened it up it would spring and clip onto your nose. Now, I don't have one of those. What I do have is a pair of about 1840s double sprung pince-nez. Now these are definitely meant to be held onto the nose. We know this because the handle is very small, so it's not very good for holding. It's actually just for threading a ribbon through. And also, we'll do some close-ups, but up here, it's very finely sanded to allow for more grip. So what you do is you pull it open like that, and you can leave it on the face, and it stays on. Another good thing about these is that they can actually be folded together. There's a little ledge here, I don't know if you can see, which is actually for housing this lens. But because these are so old, I really don't want to try. I mean, when I got them, they were actually folded up, and I unfolded them, but they're so old, I don't really want to risk it. So I'll leave them as they are. Now we're going to jump forward to the 1880s, and this kind of pince-nez becomes very popular. This is the C bridge, or the sprung bridge, or a C spring, whatever you want to call it. And these were popular from about the 1880s to 1940. They were still being used. And basically all it means is that the bridge is in a C shape. And this works much the same as the other ones. You bring it up and you rest it on your nose. There you go. Now one thing you may notice about these is that they actually have nose pads. Now sometimes these were made of shell, these ones are made of cork, and later ones would have been sort of serrated and made with celluloid. And you can see the nose pads also can move on their own. Now some of these can actually be folded up, and if they can, they'll normally have a hook or a loop for doing so. These are very bendy, but they can't really be folded up. This type, on the other hand, as you can see, these are sunglass versions. Now the nose pads are that kind of serrated celluloid, and they clip onto the nose like this. These ones are probably from the 1890s and 1900s, and if you bring them around you can see there's a pin and there's a hook, and so these ones are actually meant to clip together, and these ones aren't so delicate, so I can probably manage that. There you go. They clip together just like that so that you can carry them around much more easily. And that's the C bridge. There are, of course, other versions as in my PinceNeZ display. This one here, this pair here, you can see have a very small C bridge, and they obviously would not be able to be folded up. Next we'll take a look at the Oxford type here. They're called Oxfords or Varsity. It really depends what publication you're reading, what manufacturer makes them. At the end of the day, these kind of names like Oxford, Varsity, aristocrat, admiral, all these kinds of names that are given to different styles of eyewear are just branding names. So anyway, here we go. Here's the Oxford, and it's much of the same, except the bridge up here is what's sprung, and there's nothing really going over my nose. These ones are oftentimes much more decorative, and lots of the advertising was aimed towards women. And these were very popular from about the same time, 1880s, 1890s, all the way up to the 1940s. And especially in the 40s and 30s, there was lots of advertising for this type of spectacle for women. The story goes that there was an Oxford professor who broke one of the temples on his spectacles, which looked much like these, and so he snapped off the other one, and he made these Oxford pince-nez, which were very big, which are, was unconventional for pince-nez at the time to be this big, and that's why they're called the Oxford, because he was an Oxford professor. But I'm not sure I buy this story, considering how well established pince-nez were at the time, although there were spectacles with sprung bridges, and they were called spectaclettes, I think. Another thing to note about this is the nose pads evolution, and we'll talk about nose pads soon, but you can see that the nose pads on this one are a little bit more advanced. They are made of celluloid, and they do have these nose pads in the back for stability. Next, let's get on to the ever so popular A-Stig, which some kind of my favourite type of pince-nez, just because they're probably the most interesting. So here is the A-Stig, and you can see, unlike the other pairs which open up like this, other pince-nez open up like this, and the lens orientation changes. Whereas with the A-Stig, they only go out and come back in, and once they clamp around your eyes, they should always be at the same pupillary distance. And the idea of this one is, you may have guessed, A-Stig is short for astigmatism, and if you have astigmatism, it actually depends on the direction that the light comes in through the lens. So you don't want to be changing the orientation of the lens every time you wear them. The lens has to be in the exact same orientation, which is why this one allowed you to correct for astigmatism. So the pupillary distance is the measurement from the distance between both of your pupils here. So you can see this diagram here. And lenses to correct astigmatism were actually invented in 1825 by a man called George Airy, but the frame technology wasn't really up to scratch, so they weren't very good until the invention of the A-Stig in the 1890s. So another thing that's important about this and the pupillary distance is that the optical center of the lens has to be in front of your pupil so that you get the best clarity of vision. That's why people say don't buy off the rack reading glasses, because they're not optimized for your face, they're not custom, so the optical center could be all over the place because they're just made so cheaply. So when they're up here, the lenses have not changed orientation, and when they're down here, the lens have also not changed orientation, although the pupillary distance is messed up. So that's the idea of the technology it took to correct astigmatism back then. These ones are also referred to as bar springs or steel bridge pince-nez, so you can find them under those names as well. They were also marketed as sporting pince-nez because of the way they fit and because of the fact that they held very tightly to the face. But they're not the most flattering design, I must admit. They are probably one of the uglier designs. But yeah, if you need astigmatism correction, these are the pince-nez for you. You can also get them rimless, but that's very rare. You can get them without rims. Next on our list we have the fingerpiece pince-nez, and they're called so because of the fingerpiece that you can use to operate them to open the springs, open and close them. Now in this model the bridge is actually fixed and is unsprung, and instead you have two levers which attach to springs and then attached to the actual nose pieces, as you can see them moving there. Now these were actually invented in 1893 by a man called Jules Cotet, or Jules Cotet, I'm not sure how to say his name, but the patent that he made was then sold to American Optical, who successfully marketed them under the name Fitzhugh pince-nez, which is how most people know them today. Fitzhugh because I guess you just pinch them and they fits you. It fits a lot easier on the face, and they don't fall off as easy, so I guess that was the idea. So these could also come with wire frames, or they could also come with celluloid frames. Here's an unglazed pair of celluloid ones that I have now, and you can see these ones are much more subtle and they're much more aesthetically pleasing. Another type of pince-nez you have, which is very similar to the sea bridge, is called the Eccentric. And these were popular in the 1910s, I think, most of them. And this is basically, I don't have a pair of Eccentrics, so this is the same one from before, but rather than going round, the metal curls up and comes round, kind of twists. And that's what they call the Eccentric. Another type you have is the curler patent, which is basically the same, and it's popular in the 1920s. And it's basically a sea bridge that has swiveling nose pads. They just swivel up and down. I think that's pretty much the only difference. But I don't have a pair of those, so I don't know. I just saw them in a museum exhibition. Now, by the Edwardian era, glasses and such had kind of become almost like jewellery and kind of cool, and so people would start wearing them out and about, and they weren't just used for reading anymore. They could also be correction for short-sightedness. So you find lots of bifocal ones, or even correction for seeing long distance. These could be worn all the time. So from about 1900 all the way up to the 1940s and 50s, these were still very, very popular. And you can tell this change in attitude occurred because of the types of things that were being made, the accessories being made to keep them. Not only was it ribbons and lanyards now, but you could also just keep them permanently attached to your face and secure them to the face with things like these ear hooks. So if the glasses fell down, they would just dangle here, and you wouldn't put them away in your pocket. That was just to keep them, to stop them smashing. And for ladies, this kind, where you attach the pince-nez here, and then you have a hairpin, which you would pop into your hair. Now, this doesn't really work very well on men, of course, but the women, they would just attach that to their hair, and if the pince-nez fell, it would just hang here, and they could pop it back on their face. So with these kinds of devices, you can tell that people were keeping them on for very long periods of time, and they were just wearing them around. Now, if we're to talk about nose pads briefly, of course the thing that keeps every pince-nez on is the sprung bridge or some kind of spring, or the finger piece. But from the 1840s onwards all the way up to the 1880s, there were no nose pads. And that is simply because they weren't intended to be worn around all day, every day. When people started wearing them more often, the kind of stationary nose pads that we saw kind of in the beginning, this kind of nose pads were swapped out for ones that could move and were more springy, and also ones that pivoted and turned, and of course later ones that would pinch and clip onto the nose. Some of these clips are metal, some are cork as we've seen, and of course, as I said, some were actually made of celluloid or horn. Obviously swiveling nose pads offer better grip, but you start to see many different types and different shapes of nose pads, and especially kind of nose pads that come in two pieces that go a little bit higher up the nose to offer more stability. And that would have been really helpful for keeping those on your nose, because I know that from wearing these ones here, these sunglasses type, which I wear in the summer, when you sweat or when you move about too much, they start to fall off, they start to wiggle, they start to slide down the nose, and all hell breaks loose. So those extra nose pads are really helpful. Now, I think we've discussed all kinds of lanyards. They could be ribbon, string, chains, they could be clips in the hair, they could be ear hooks, they could be all kinds of things. They could even be the retractable type that I show you in my monocle video. Check that out if you haven't seen it yet. And so there were plenty of ways to secure those to the body, and I have so many strings and so many ribbons in a box which were attached to all of these pince-nez, which are very delicate and very difficult to display. I think I'll wear these ones for the outro because these are kind of cool. Look like Neo. Well guys, thank you so much for watching this video of my pince-nez collection. These aren't all of the pince-nez I own because I own lots of the same type, but I thought it would be quite boring for me to show you all these, for me to show you the same type over and over again. And I kind of wanted to go more into the history and when these things were kind of popular, and you know, what you can expect from wearing them, what kind of lanyards you use, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that's enough detail for you. This video has gone on for a little bit too long, longer than I'd hoped, and I'm under some time constraints a little bit today, so sorry if I spoke fast. But thank you so much for watching. Please check out the next video, subscribe, check out my Instagram, buy me a coffee if you want to support the channel. Thank you so much for coming. End of video, done!